How many of you have thought about flying as either a avocation or a vocation? Pilots? Are any pilots in here? Anybody taking flight lessons? Okay. Anybody thought about going into space? Or how about sending your teachers into space? Or maybe your little brother, you know. Well, there's the opportunity to do that coming. There's actually commercial space flight that's a brand new business, and people are trying to figure out how to send folks into space on a commercial basis, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I'm going to also talk about some of my experiences in space. I was a commander of the International Space Station for 4 months. This was our patch from our mission, the 2 names on the bottom. Can anybody read those? Anybody read Russian? Yeah. Okay. What's that? You are Russian?
No, it's in Russian.
It is in. That's good you recognize that. That's great. Anyway. There was a little thing in the middle there, right? Yeah, okay. But we did speak Russian and English on board the station, but I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. But before I get into that, let me start not quite all the way back at the beginning, but as Ali mentioned, I did go to college at the U.S. Naval Academy. Some people would dispute whether that's really a college or not, but we did get a college degree. And it was a great experience for me, and it's what I wanted to do most of the time when I was growing up. I decided when I was 11, I wanted to be a fighter pilot. My dad had been a fighter pilot in World War II. When I was 12, I decided I wanted to be a test pilot because the X-15 was flying, and I thought it was really cool to go fast and high. And by the time I was 13, I decided I wanted to be an astronaut because I really wanted to go a long way. And we were starting to fly in space by that time. And so what I did was I looked at what most of the astronauts in the early days had done to get to where they were. And I started planning my life kind of the same way, looking at what school they went to, how they lived their lives, what kind of careers they had had, what kind of airplanes they had flown, et cetera. And so I started moving in that direction. I did become a Navy pilot in 1973, was assigned to the USS Midway as my first ship. I had the privilege of flying F-4 Phantoms, which were a fantastic airplane in its day, and gave me a chance to go Mach 2 and up to 60,000 feet and fly in some pretty interesting places around the world. You know, we had at that time about a $5 million airplane. It weighed about 30 tons, and we all thought we were pretty hot stuff. And most of us had mustaches, so you wouldn't recognize me unless. But we learned a lot doing that, and we learned to stay alive handling a pretty big airplane and going pretty fast. And I learned from my dad, who's in the wheelchair there, how important it is to go a little further than you really think you can go, to take chances, to be not afraid to make mistakes, and to keep your dreams out there in front of you and keep working really hard for them, because then you can do some pretty cool things. And I had a chance to fly both of these airplanes as well as about 40 or 50 others. The interesting thing to me now in looking at it is that neither one of these airplanes are active in the fleet anymore. Almost every airplane I flew is either on a stick in front of a base or a museum, and most of the ships I was on are museums in some harbor now. So I guess that puts me in the same category as kind of obsolete. But I'm still working, and it was great to have those experiences. But you've got to set the dreams about how you're going to get there. In aviation, they try to keep the training as simple as possible, because what we're trying to do is handle some complicated pieces of machinery and do some complicated things. And most of us take a pretty straightforward approach to life. Push the throttle forward, you go faster. Pull it back, you slow down. Pull up, you go up. That's pretty straightforward. But what you're doing is aviating. And so our instructors gave us 3 words to remember. If you ever have a problem in an airplane, you know, the engine catches on fire, the wing's starting to break off, co-pilot spills the coffee, whatever it is, you got to remember to do 3 things, and you got to do them in the right order. Aviate, navigate, communicate. And I want you to remember these, because I think they might be useful for you going through high school, going through college, and going through life if you look at it right. What does aviate mean? Anybody know? To fly and keep it under control, right? I mean, you can be in an airplane and be all over the sky and not be able to land on the runway or take off or whatever, but if you don't aviate, you're not going to get to where you want to go. And if you don't aviate first when you have a problem in the airplane, if you say, oh my God, I can't read the airspeed indicator, I got smoke in the cockpit, and you let go of the stick or the yoke or whatever it is, the airplane's going to go out of control. So the first thing you have to do is control it. That means you've got to understand your environment, you've got to understand what you're in control of. Maybe it's a car in your case. You've got to understand, if things get bad, how do I get out of danger? And then first you've got to recognize that you are in danger. So you got to aviate first. And we learned all of that in flying as the very first thing, is how to keep the airplane under control. If you didn't know how to navigate, didn't know how to drop bombs, didn't know how to even talk on the radio, you had to aviate first. And I recommend that you take that approach to life, whether you're in a car, walking down the street, hanging out with your friends at a party. Always be ready and willing to recognize when things aren't right and to do something about it, and keep yourself under control. Don't ever put anything in your airplane, in your body, that you don't understand and don't recognize. Anything that's going to take away your own control. It only takes a couple of minutes to not be aviating properly. You can get through the rest of your life if you always keep that in mind as your first priority for you and your friends. Navigate. What does navigate mean? Anybody? What do you do when you drive from your house to the mall? You navigate, right? I mean, if you don't know how to navigate, you can't get to the mall unless you're riding with somebody else who does know how. So in an airplane, whenever you go someplace, there's no exit signs, you know, there's no street signs. You got to be able to navigate. And so once you've got the airplane under control, if you've got a problem, now you got to figure out, where am I going to go? How am I going to get to an airport where I can land safely? How am I just going to get to my destination? A pilot always files a flight plan when they're going to go somewhere. We have to tell air traffic control what time we want to take off, what our waypoints are, what towns we're going to fly over, where we're going as a final destination, and what time we're going to get there. A lot of reasons for that, of course. They have to deconflict traffic. They got to give you a clearance. You want to share that information with your crew so that they know to support that plan. And then you got to tell the people at the other end, I'm going to arrive in Florida for a shuttle launch at 10 o'clock. Be there to meet me. And so your people at your destination need to know where you're going. So I always do a flight plan, but I always do it in pencil because I might want to change it or I might have to change it. So you got to be flexible, but you got to start with a plan. For each one of you, I recommend you take a piece of notebook paper and write down your flight plan. On the left-hand column, put down 2012 and the next 25 years. Put your age right now. Put your grade, or what year you're going to be in college or graduate school or wherever. And then put some very important events on there when you think they might happen, like graduation, or like get a job, get married, have children, achieve something really big, like start your own business. But put those goals down there and put them in pencil. And then figure out, how am I going to get to that goal if I don't apply to college like a year early, or if I don't apply to grad school early, or I don't get training in this so I can do that job. Put your plan together in a way that you can make it all fit, but do it in pencil. And share it with other people, because if you don't share that plan with the people that are most important to you, they're not going to be able to help you. They can help you stay on that plan if you fall off of it, and they can help you maybe improve on it if it has some flaws in it. But share it with your friends, your family, people you trust, and listen to them. And then if you find yourself off that plan, figure out how to get back on it and replan from there. So that's what navigation's all about. Communicate. I know a lot of accidents have occurred because a pilot has had something go bad in the airplane, and rather than fly the airplane first, they started talking about it on the radio because they didn't know what else to do. They said, oh my God, my wing's on fire, I don't know what to do, I don't know where the airport is, and they just start blabbering, and then they fly into the ground. You communicate last because you've got to get yourself under control, you've got to get your airplane pointed in the right direction, then you tell the ground what's going on, or your crewmates or whatever. Communication is extremely important. But if you do that before you do those other things, you might die. For you, communication means you've got to be understood by other people. Communication is two-way. Right now, I'm in broadcast mode, and you have to listen to me, and I apologize for that, but I'll take questions at the end. But communication is two-way. Transmission is one way. In an airplane, when you want to talk to air traffic control or to your wingman or whoever else you need to talk to, you push a button on the throttle that shuts off your receiver and turns on your transmitter, and you can talk as long as you want, but you're not going to hear a word from anybody else until you take that finger off the button. Then you can communicate and get feedback. Then you can hear what they heard you say, and then they can tell you, how do you get to that airport? How do you get around that thunderstorm? How do you avoid the mountains? So then you can go back and forth. Pilots communicate in a special language, right? Some of you have probably listened to movies and the recordings of towers, or pilots speak something that you don't understand unless you are a pilot. It's their own language. Doctors speak their own language, right? That's how they communicate with each other. They go to med school for 4 years so they can learn to talk in a way that their patients won't understand them. My dad was a doctor, so I can talk about him. But every profession has its own language. You have your own language. How many of you actually spell words all the way out when you text to somebody? No, you don't. I don't believe that. I got 5 kids. That's the only way they communicate with me is by text. But you have your own language when you talk to each other. Hopefully you have a slightly different language when you talk to your teachers and maybe your parents. But you have to adjust your language depending on who you're talking to and what message you want to get across, right? How many of you are fluent in another language besides English? I mean really fluent. About 10%. That's pretty typical in an American audience. I recommend that you learn at least some of another language. And if you're ever going to work overseas or be stationed overseas in the military or just even visit another country, learn enough of their language to let them know that you're interested in learning about them, because they will trust you more if you actually make an effort to learn their language. I learned Russian because I flew with my Russian crewmates. I learned Japanese because I lived in Japan for a while. Not very well, but enough to let them know that I was willing to communicate with them. Now, how many people around the world speak English? Everybody, right? Seems like it. They don't really. They think they speak English, but, you know, they just learn from the music and the TV shows. But a lot of English is being used, but if you make an effort to learn somebody else's language, it makes a difference. So communication is going to be extremely important to you. And you communicate by ways other than just what you say. You communicate by how you say it and how you look. If you're going to go in for a job and you come in those shorts and a T-shirt, and I'm trying to interview you for an engineering job or a job out front where people are going to see you, I'm probably going to say, why don't you go find a gas station to work at or something like that. Not you. Just using you as an example. I'll find a good example to use for you in a minute. But you communicate by your appearance and the way you come across. And so if you want to make an impression and you want to get somebody to take you seriously, you've got to take yourself seriously and think about, there's more to me than just the words I use. And then you'll make an impression. You'll make a difference. So what are those words? Aviate, navigate, communicate. There'll be a test at the end. All right, let's talk about spaceflight a little bit. That's what y'all really wanted to hear about, right? Not my lecture. But I had the opportunity to fly 3 times on a shuttle. My first flight was in 1990 after being at NASA for 6 years. We were delayed a couple of years because of the Challenger accident, but we finally did get scheduled for a launch in July of 1990. We finally launched in November of 1990. It was a classified mission for the Department of Defense. I'd love to tell you what we did. We launched right before the first Gulf War, but if I did, I'd have to kill all of you. But you'd be real proud of me, proud of us if you knew what we did. It was an important mission. We were supposed to launch in July, as I said. My wife was pregnant with our first son, our only son actually, and at one point our launch date was August 28th and his due date was August 28th. And everybody's going, what are you going to do? And I said, pretty sure fate will take care of this because shuttle missions move. She launched right on her due date, and we launched 3 months later, so it worked out. But it was a great mission. We landed back in Florida after 5 days, and my first thought was, where's the next shuttle? I got to get back in space. It was just too much fun. So 3 years later, I was scheduled to launch in, again, July of 1993. We went down to the Cape 4 times trying to get off the pad. We kept getting closer and closer every time until on the 3rd attempt, we were down to 3 seconds, and the engine shut down. And so we're sitting there kind of swaying in the breeze, thinking well, I can't tell you exactly what we said, but we were very frustrated because we'd already done this a few times. But we finally did launch in September, and we had the opportunity to launch 2 payloads, one of which we went back and retrieved 6 days later with the shuttle arm, as you can see here, put it back in the payload bay. 2 of my crewmates did spacewalks to test tools that were going to be used on the next mission, the first Hubble repair mission, where they fixed the optics on the Hubble Space Telescope. And they did a great job with that. And then we had the honor of making the first night landing at Kennedy Space Center, and that was kind of cool too. In fact, the head of human spaceflight at the time met me at the bottom of the stairs after we landed and said, so which was harder, landing in the shuttle at night or landing on a carrier at night? He wanted me to say the shuttle because there were some people who didn't want us to fly the shuttle at night. I said, oh, it's much harder on the carrier. The runway didn't move at all on me when I was lining up on final. But the one thing about the shuttle is that you only get one shot at it. You know, the engines aren't running when you land. You're just a big glider, like a paper airplane, but a lot heavier. You weigh about 100 tons. And you're touching down at about 200 miles an hour. So it is a challenge, and we've practiced it about 1,000 times. in the shuttle training aircraft, which is modified to fly like the shuttle, before you ever get to do it on live TV. You know, you don't want to be the first one to run off the runway doing that. But it was fun and an exciting challenge. After that, my boss asked me if I'd mind doing a management job for a little while. I'd been at NASA for a few years, and we were just starting to work with the Russians, and so I set up a Russian program office. I said, how long do you want me to do this? He said, about a year or so. So 5 years later, I was the manager of the Shuttle-Mir program for 3.5 years, and I didn't get to go to the Mir myself, but I felt like I lived there for 30 months because we have 7 Americans who lived up there for that amount of time. And we docked the shuttle to the Mir, we brought supplies up, we brought new modules up. The Mir had its problems at the end because of a collision and because of some degradation of the hardware. It lasted for over 15 years with a 5-year design life. But it was a great place to learn, and so we got ready to fly the International Space Station by working on the Mir space station. But I really wanted to get back to flying, and so I convinced my boss to let me step down from management and take over as a commander of the 3rd expedition to the space station, the 3rd mission that went up there. And flew with 2 crewmates, Vladimir Dezhurov and Mikhail Turin, both of who are great guys. Vladimir is a former Russian fighter pilot, so he and I had a lot of interesting things to talk about. And Mikhail is an engineer who helped design the rendezvous algorithm for the Russian Progress vehicle. Space station looks like this now. How many of you have seen it fly over? It's pretty bright, isn't it? If you look at it with binoculars, you can, on the right conditions, you can actually see the shape of it. It's the brightest, largest object in the sky. And I meant to look it up, and I'll look it up at the end of the meeting. But if you go on the NASA website, spaceflight.gov, you can find when it flies over this area, at what time. It's usually early morning, late evening, probably about the time you're getting ready to go to school, right before dawn. And you can see it fly over. So it's pretty big now, but it was small when I was there. We were just the 3rd group to join it. It only had a few solar arrays and a few modules. But a crew of 4 brought us up. The ones in the striped shirts are my second favorite crew. They're the ones that brought us to the station. The guys in the red shirts with the big smiles were the crew that was getting ready to go home, so they were very happy to see us. And then those of us in the white shirts had no clue what we were in for. Neat thing about taking group pictures in space is everybody can be on the front row. And actually, this picture is upside down, but that doesn't matter either in space. So anyway, we closed the hatch, and I think you can look on our expressions on our face. We were starting to realize the shuttle's leaving, and we're staying, and we can't leave. So we had to. I mean, we got along great, and we had trained well together, and we did a lot of interesting things. And we also had a way off the station if we needed it in an emergency, and that would be the Soyuz spacecraft. And that's a Russian spacesuit that was designed for me, and we actually did a small flight in the Soyuz to move from one port to another, and so we were trained to fly in that. This is the heart of the station. This is the first node that went up there on the U.S. side, and I think I have a pointer here, if I can figure it out. Don't look at that. This is the entrance. Boy, that's really bright, isn't it? This is the entrance to the Russian segment. Through there, behind the cameraman is the U.S. laboratory. That sign says speed limit 17,500 miles an hour. Some of you kids even couldn't exceed that, right? But that's the speed you have to go in order to stay in low Earth orbit. If you go slower, you come home. If you go faster, you go somewhere in the solar system. This is our workout area, our gymnasium where we lifted weights. Some of you smarter folks are saying that's no big deal in 0G, right? But they attached the weight bar to big bungees, and the docs kept cranking up the numbers on them. And so we had to keep lifting weights to keep in shape. This is our water wall. This is about 2 tons of water in 100-pound bags that we kept stored there and used on a routine basis. The reason we have so much water is because it really is our way of surviving on the station. Now, obviously, when we prepare food, we have to add water to it, fix our drinks. You have to wash with it, brush your teeth, etc. But we also use that water for the air we breathe. The Russians had an electrolysis machine in their segment that would produce oxygen and hydrogen, enough oxygen for 6 people for 24 hours out of just a few gallons of water. And so it's a very good system, almost closed loop now in terms of recovering the waste from humans and being able to recover it. Right here is a hatch that would go to a habitation module once it's attached, and over here is the U.S. airlock. You can see tools all over the place and some of the hardware that we used. This is the external view of that same module. This is the Unity node. That's the U.S. laboratory, the airlock, the Soyuz spacecraft we use as an emergency vehicle, and then the arm that Canada provides for moving objects around the outside of the station. And this is the beginning of the Russian segment. This is what we call the cargo module, and then the service module where two of us lived, and then the Progress spacecraft on the back that provided our supplies and our reboost capability and brought up water and air, et cetera. You can see all the windows on the Russian segment. There were actually, I counted them, there were 23 windows in the Russian segment. In the U.S. segment, we had one. Different philosophies. We argued about that a lot. We have a few more now. This is the Soyuz spacecraft in flight. We had a crew come visit us halfway through our mission. It's pretty small. It's about the width of this podium here, maybe a little bit more. Yeah, probably about like this. About 3 meters. And 3 people are crammed in there with their knees on their chest during launch, which takes about 9 minutes. And then it takes them 2 days to actually rendezvous with the station. They have a little bit of a living compartment here with a small, very small toilet and a little bit of food and not much space. So by the time they dock and we open the hatch, they're really happy to be let out. And it was nice to see the smiles on their face. And that's the crew that came to visit us, 2 Russians and a French astronaut, Claudie Agnier, who came to do their own science program. But the main reason they came was to bring us a new Soyuz, because they have a 7-month service life, and so they have to rotate them every 6 months or so to make sure we have a fresh one up there. So they took our old one back and left us with the new one. They spent 8 days with us. They actually arrived on Halloween dressed as cosmonauts and actually brought us some treats. So that was nice. Little fresh fruit, vegetables. It looks like they're working hard on a scientific experiment here, but actually they're trying to figure out what to have for lunch. This was one of the boxes of food that we have. We have red boxes for Russian food, blue boxes for American food, and white boxes for everything else. And so they're just trying to mix and match the menu. But we had pretty good food up there. Spacewalk is a part of building the space station. EVAs, as we call them, have been a part of the space program for quite a while, all the way back to Ed White on Gemini. And as a pilot, normally the pilots are trained to land the shuttle, to command it, to operate the systems, and then the mission specialists who wish they were pilots get trained to do the fun stuff like EVAs and operate the robotic arm and all that. It's almost a union thing. Well, since I was the only American on board the station, I got trained for EVA and operating the arm and all that stuff, and that was kind of fun. So I did get to do an EVA about 2/3 of the way through our mission. I went outside with Vladimir Dozhurov, who'd already done 9 EVAs and was very well experienced, and so that was fun. And he was a good guy to learn from. That's Vladimir there. Interestingly, all the pictures from our EVA are of Vladimir, because it's like when I go on vacation, all the pictures are of the other members of the family, because I have the camera. And I had the camera outside. Has anybody here, as a side note, ever seen a picture of Neil Armstrong on the moon? No, you haven't. You've seen the reflection of Neil Armstrong on the moon. Neil had the camera as the commander, and Buzz said, "Oh, it's okay, Neil, you can have the camera." That was pretty smart of Buzz, because all the pictures of people on the moon are of Buzz, and except for a reflection of Neil in the helmet. So when you get to be doing something famous or something important, make sure you hand the camera off to somebody else for at least a couple of pictures. All right, so we did a good EVA. This is the working end of the Canadian arm, and it's a really fantastic piece of machinery. We call it robotics because it can be programmed to do things automatically, and you operate it with a hand controller. It's very much like your arm in terms of the way it works, and the shuttle arm is similar. It has a shoulder, so it rotates like this. It has an elbow that only rotates in 2 dimensions, and then it has a wrist that can rotate and bend just like yours. And instead of a hand, it has that grapple fixture that's a big open can that fits down over a big nail-like object called a grapple fixture, and then snares inside it, wires, grab that, tighten it up, and then it can lift up to 35,000 pounds out in space. Or it can pick up an astronaut, move them around, it can pick up spare parts. And the neat thing about this one is when that grapple fixture is attached to the side of the station, you can actually let go at the shoulder, and then that becomes your hand. So it can kind of inchworm its way around the outside of the station. Or you can put that end on a mobile platform on top of the truss and let go with this one, and then move back and forth 300 feet across the station, moving hardware, people, or whatever. It's a very, very capable piece of machinery. It's operated from inside, better than any PlayStation or Xbox you've ever seen. It's got six displays, 3 computers, 2 hand controllers, and a lot of little buttons that I forgot how to use. But it can do amazing things. And fortunately, they give you enough information. So it actually moves in 7 dimensions, 7 degrees of freedom. Now, a normal person moves in 6 degrees of freedom. So we're never sure where they got that 7th degree from. But I do know you have to watch the elbow really hard because it can run into the station. I came about that close. But I had somebody looking over my shoulder. But anyway, it's a very capable piece of machinery. This is the 3 of us in our living quarters. That's me upside down in the middle, where we ate our meals. 2 of us slept in there. Our waste containment compartment is right here. That's the bathroom. And then back there is the Progress vehicle. And so we spent a lot of time in there just relaxing and also communicating with the ground. And we had a good crew. Hygiene is just as important in space as it is down here. You know, we brushed our teeth. We washed every day after workout. And of course, we did a lot of public relations while we were up there speaking to the ground. And so we did eventually have to get haircuts. And so here's a little mental exercise for you. As the commander, I was able to tell the other 2 guys, you cut each other's hair first. And then I picked the guy who had the worst looking haircut to cut mine. You got to think about that a second, guys. It worked out. It was no worse than the haircuts I got down here on Earth. I have 5 kids, and as luck would have it, 3 of them had birthdays while I was gone, of course. And it's like being on a deployment in the military. All the birthdays occur while you're gone. So because of the technology available to us, each one of them wanted their own personalized video birthday card. And so I'd do a tour of the station and send them a picture down. That was to my daughter, Ashley, who was at Purdue at the time. And a picture of Dad floating in space, or lost in space, depending on your perspective. But they all appreciated that, and they kept them. We also would get care packages from the ground when a supply vehicle would come up. And they'd send us books and DVDs and CDs with music, etc. And my younger kids sent this one up, the Worst Case Scenario Survival Handbook for Travel. You've probably seen these on bookshelves. This one has a chapter on how to survive an alien abduction on a UFO. I don't know why they picked that one, but they thought it was important that I read that chapter. And the next time I talked to them on the video, they said, so Dad, did you get the book? Did you read it? Okay, you're all set. So, as a Navy graduate, I paid attention to the Navy season. It wasn't a very good season that year, but we did still have Army-Navy, which is kind of like a whole other season in itself. The shuttle was supposed to dock the day before the Army-Navy game, and the ground was real good about sending audio of games up to me. I had carried my Beat Army banner up there, and the shuttle got delayed. So in order to, and it had 2 Academy graduates on it too, so we were going to have a cheering section for the team. Well, I had to fabricate one out of hot air here, and this was 2 of the spacesuits. It didn't work. I sent the picture down to the team, and they still lost, but that was the last time Army beat us. Any Army fans in here? Sorry about that. Exercise, extremely important when you're in 0G, because, you know, when we're standing here on Earth, we're constantly working our bodies, working our muscles, our bones. Your bones are sensing the gravity. They're generating more calcium. Your bones are staying in shape if you do any workout at all. In 0G, you could be completely a vegetable, and your bones will lose calcium. Your muscles will become almost useless if you don't exercise. So we exercise 2 to 2.5 hours every day on a treadmill, on a bicycle, lifting weights, various things. I rarely smiled on the treadmill like that, except for the camera, because it was one of the most uncomfortable things I've ever done in my life. If you see this harness here that goes over my shoulder and then attaches to my hips, and these bungees here, and this is for stabilization, the docs kept sending us increasing pressure to add to those bungees, because you want to simulate your weight on the treadmill while you're running. And it's hard to do in 0G without that really uncomfortable harness. But we would run for an hour on there and watch a movie or listen to a book or something. It's very important to do that. Otherwise, you really aren't going to be able to walk when you get back to Earth. Or if any of you all are going to go to Mars, you're going to have to do this en route, or you're not going to be able to walk when you get to Mars. So it's a very important part of space travel now. And it also helps reduce the calcium loss that goes with it. It helps psychologically make you feel better too. So it's a really good thing to do. And we had a little bit of recreational sports. I was a youth sports coach for a long time and coached basketball and volleyball and stuff. And so I brought a little basketball goal up there and a couple of different kind of balls. And when the French astronaut came up to visit us, she said, "What is that for?" And I said, "I play basketball." And she said, "Come on, show me." I said, "Okay." So I grabbed the basketball, you know, you can't just arc it into the basket, right? So I had to bounce it off the ceiling. Boom, nothing but net. She said, that was amazing. I said, yeah, it was. And she said, do it again. I tried like 20 more times and never got close. But that's the whole key to athletics, right? Don't think, just shoot, right? Sometimes it works. People tell me that's what you do in golf, but it's never worked for me. Anyway, we did have a little bit of fun while we were up there. And when the crew came to pick us up to take us home, you can see who's been in the sun in Florida and who hasn't in that picture. But we had 10 people on board for a while and a big feast and nice big meals and had a lot of fun. And the shuttle was the key to all this. And let me talk about the shuttle for just a couple of minutes, in case you're interested, because you all know the shuttle is coming here next week, right? Now, I found out that there are some people who think the shuttle is actually going to fly itself from Florida to Dulles and land. And somebody said, is the runway big enough for the shuttle to land? I said, well, it is actually, but it's not going to do that. It'll come on the back of the 747 that brings it all around the country. And it'll be spectacular. On the 17th, it'll fly all around D.C., and on the 19th, they're going to have a big ceremony at Barhazy to welcome it into the exhibit. And encourage you to get out of school and go do that. When the shuttle launches, you lie on your back for about 2.5 hours waiting for it to happen, and you think about a lot of different things, because you've got 500,000 gallons of fuel about 6 feet away from you, liquid oxygen, liquid hydrogen, very volatile stuff. You've trained for this for a long time. The whole world is watching. You can't afford to make a mistake. And a lot of stuff goes through your mind. And you try to concentrate on your training. You try to concentrate on where you are and what you're doing. But it's really hard, because that's a lot of machinery, and you're going to go really fast. In the countdown, when you get down to 30 seconds, the shuttle internal computers take over the count. And at that point, you're kind of all set to go. And they're checking everything thousands of times a second. You get down to 10 seconds. And in our second mission, we got down to 10 seconds. And the main engine sequence starts. The fuel starts flowing, and then at 6 seconds, the engine starts firing one at a time every half second. You feel the vibration in back. The whole shuttle starts to shake, and then it bends over about 6 feet at the top, because the engines are offset from the external tank, and the tanks are being held in place by the solid rocket boosters by these 8 giant bolts. So it's not going anywhere till those bolts release, but it's building up to about 1.5 million pounds of thrust. So it bends over like this, and then as the engines come up to full speed, it bends back, and that's when the solids ignite and you lift off the pad. Well, on our third attempt, we got down to 6 seconds. The engine started. I said to the guys, okay, get ready for the ride of your lives. And they said, you said that last time. And okay, but really this time. So we start shaking and bending, and then we get down to 4 seconds. The engines are coming up to full speed. We get to 3 seconds, and then it didn't really sound like that, but that's what it felt like. All the engines shut down, and we didn't know what had happened. And we're sitting there kind of swaying in the breeze. And we got all this fuel flowing next to us. And I turned to the pilot in the right seat who has all the engine controls. I said, Bill, what did you do? He said, I didn't touch a thing, boss. But the valve had not opened quite fast enough, and the computer caught it and shut everything down. And the quickest way to get out of that seat and out of that survival gear is to launch. You'll be in orbit in 8.5 minutes. If you shut down on the pad, it's 1.5 hours till they get out there to get you unstrapped and get you back in to get out of that suit. So not a fun thing. Since that was our third or fourth attempt, the families had been very frustrated by the fact that we hadn't launched. And so when I got back on the launch tower, I called my wife because I knew where she was hanging out. And I said, hey, we didn't go again. And she said, yeah, we noticed that. Do I have to ride that little NASA airplane back to Houston again? I said, I'm sorry, because it's going to be about a month. And it was a month before we tried again, because they had to change out the engines. But eventually, you're going to go, and eventually we did. And when you get down to that point, and the engines are starting to wind up, and they're starting to generate thrust, and you're starting to feel that power behind you. On my first mission, I didn't really know what to expect. And as we got to that point, and then we did the twang, and we came back, and the solid rockets ignited, it was like somebody hit you while you're sitting still on the freeway in a semi going about 80 miles an hour. It's that big a kick in the pants. You leap off the pad. You're going about 100 knots by the time you clear the tower. And in about 40 seconds, this is going through a cloud deck at night. We launched at night, and there was this big orange cloud all around us initially. And then we start outrunning it. And then as you get higher and higher, you're emptying the tank, you're emptying the solid rockets. There we are at about 200 feet going 100 knots. In 40 seconds, you're going the speed of sound straight up. all this vibration going on because you're on the solids, and you're generating about 7 million pounds of thrust to lift 4.5 million pounds of hardware, really. That's the shock wave. At about 2 minutes into the flight, and this really got our attention at night, all the thrust starts tailing off, and you feel like everything's shut down. And what's happened is the solids have used up all their fuel, so you've lost a lot of thrust, no longer having 2 Gs pushing you into the seat. At that point, it gets very quiet inside, and on that first mission, I started to take a deep breath, and then all of a sudden, kaboom! And the solid rockets blasted off the side of the tank. These big tongues of flame went shooting across the windshield from the separation rockets, and it really gets your attention. And I turned to the commander, and I said, "Is it supposed to look like that?" And he said, "I don't know. I never launched at night before." It just lit up the whole cockpit. It's like a big train wreck. But then the solids fall off, and then you're almost on an electric drive, and it gets very smooth inside. And I almost convinced myself on that night launch I was back in the simulator. I just was having a hard time, actually realizing I was going into space until I looked at the gauges, and we're going through 100,000 feet, 120,000 feet. We're going through Mach 6, Mach 8, Mach 10, and then we're leaving the atmosphere, and all the sound on the outside goes away because you have no more friction on the outside. You know the sound you hear in an airplane or a car going really fast, the air noise on the outside, it just kind of all went away. And then when you get to the top of the atmosphere, the shuttle actually levels off because you got enough altitude, you just don't have enough speed. So then you really start accelerating, and you build up to 2 Gs, 2.5, 3 Gs pushing you back in your seat because you've got to go from 0 to 18,000 miles an hour in 8.5 minutes and burn half a million gallons of fuel doing it. It's pretty exciting. It's like you're on top of a cloud deck, upside down, just going faster and faster. I loved it. I like going fast. And but I was very careful to take a deep breath before we got to that point because I've talked to people who had a hard time breathing during the high G, and also somebody told me they actually tried to move their head and it fell off the headrest and they're stuck like this for the last half minute of the flight. But we got into orbit. We emptied the fuel out of that tank, and when the main engine's cut off, it is startling because you're under all this G and you're thinking, I'm going fast. My 6-year-old grandson says, "It's really strong." I said, "Yes, Charles, it is." And then it all disappears. And you realize there's no pressure on my backside. I'm not sitting on the seat anymore. And on my first flight, my pressure suit was a little too large, and my helmet started floating up. I could barely see out. So I popped it off, and it floated up. I tapped it. It went to the guy behind me. He put it in a sack and floated it downstairs. And I'm going through my checklist, and as the co-pilot on that one, I'd been warned, the pilots always get sick. They always get sick as soon as they get into orbit because I got to do all this stuff. So I was being very careful, very methodical, and I'd done other things to make sure I wasn't going to be sick, hopefully. And I'm really busy with the checklist because I got a lot to do to shut things down. And I look out the window, and I see this really bright light starting to come up over the horizon. You may remember this was a classified mission during Desert Shield, actually, right before Desert Storm. And I'm thinking, God, we just launched and they're already shooting at us. And what it was, not a missile, but Venus coming up above the horizon, really bright disk. And then this little sliver of new moon came up right behind it. Now, it was practically a new moon, but because you were in space, you could see the outline of the sun's glare off the back of it, and you can actually see the outline of the moon. I thought that was pretty cool. And then, as I'm watching, it was like a volcano was starting to erupt on the horizon, or something was catching on fire, and this big, bright red light. And all the colors of the rainbow started spreading out from that source, as far as you could see in both directions. And then, boom, the sun popped up. And it was a sunrise. It only took about 2 seconds. And it was the most gorgeous thing I'd ever seen. And I turned to Dick Covey, the commander, and I said, "Wow, is it always like that?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, you'll see one every 45 minutes. It's gorgeous." Because you're going around the Earth every 90 minutes, so you see a sunrise or a sunset about every 45. And I never got tired of looking at them. And you never can capture them adequately on film. But it was an amazing sight, and it made me realize I really was in a very special place. And I really was realizing a dream. I was in space. And it's an amazing way to see the world. The shuttle itself had its vulnerabilities. You know, we lost 2 of them. We now are on the last few flights, they would check the shuttle's belly every time it went up to the space station to make sure it didn't have any damage from foam. And the shuttle would dock with the station. The shuttle was key to building all this stuff because it carried most of the big components up there, including these giant solar arrays that produce about 15 kilowatts of power. That's Scott Parazynski getting ready to sew this back together. See that little tear there? They took him all the way out there on the arm on an extension. He didn't do that. and he put it back together so the solar array wouldn't come apart. We take a lot of photography up there. We had like 16 different types of cameras on my last mission, my most recent mission. I never say my last mission. Remember John Glenn? He went, when he was 77. So we'll see. But we take pictures of some pretty interesting places. This is Kennedy Space Center, where we launched from. The 2 launch pads. That shuttle landing facility at the bottom is 3 miles long, to give you an idea of scale. This was taken with a pretty strong camera. Pictures of things like the Gulf of Mexico with an algae bloom in it being swirled up by the waters of the Mississippi River Delta. Oceanographers, scientists, zoologists are very interested in pictures like this, and they use them in their research as well as to predict how things are changing in the ocean, and it is changing. This is Lake Powell, and I don't know if you can see the lines there, but they've lost 60 feet of water in the last 10, 15 years. The world is changing dramatically due to climate change. Now, I'm not going to get into the debate of what's causing it or why, but we do know it's changing. And some parts of the world are getting wetter, some are getting drier, but we can document all that from space. This is the Amazon River Basin. I took this picture on STS-51, my second mission, and during a press conference the next day, I showed the picture and I said, and look at all the forests, all the jungle that's being burned in Brazil in the Amazon basin, because they're burning it at about the rate of 60 acres a day to clear it for agriculture. I said they're burning up all those oxygen-producing trees in Brazil, and I kept saying Brazil. Well, the next day we got a message from a Brazilian ambassador to knock that off. He said it's not just us. I said, well, you have most of it. But anyway, that's what's happening in that area, and those big clouds of smoke drift up into North America. They get dust clouds from Africa that come over. We are changing it in many different ways, and we have to be careful. This one I think is interesting because this is the Ohio River and the Mississippi River coming together at Cairo, Illinois, and you can see how they don't even mix for several miles down the river. Again, a picture that scientists just love because they can do a lot of research on that. The Aurora Borealis, the Aurora Australis, the northern lights, southern lights, we flew right through them. Just a slight bump. But, no, it wasn't really, I was kidding. But they're generated by high solar activity, and we did have high solar activity while we were up there, but it took me like 50 tries to get a picture to try to get the exposure right, but it was a spectacular thing to see. Anybody recognize this? DC, yeah. That's RFK Stadium, the mall, Washington Monument. Yeah, Washington Monument there, Lincoln Memorial. This picture was taken on September the 6th, 2001. We took a lot of pictures in September, and on September the 11th, 2001, September the 11th, we were doing physical exams on each other, and as a crew medical officer, it was my job to call the results down to the ground. And the crew surgeon came on and said, hey, Frank. I said, no, hey, Steve, how's it going? He said, well, Frank, we're not having a very good day down here on Earth. And he began to describe to me what had happened at the World Trade Center and at the Pentagon, and while we were talking, plane crashed in Pennsylvania. And, we realized something very serious was happening. And as we were talking, my crewmates crowded around, and we were listening to all this. And we didn't have live TV or live internet. We had to rely on the ground to tell us what was going on. And as we were talking, I looked at the world map that we keep up on the computer, and we were coming across southern Canada. And as we were crossing there, I realized we were going to be right over New England in a minute. And so I raced around and found a video camera and a window looking in the right direction. And from over Maine, about 400 miles away, I could see New York City clear as a bell because it was a beautiful weather day all over the U.S. And that's what we saw. Big black column of smoke coming out of New York, out over Long Island and over the Atlantic. I zoomed in with the video camera as I'm talking to the ground about what I'm seeing. And as I did, this big gray blob started enveloping southern Manhattan. And what we were seeing was a second tower come down. I didn't know it at the time, but I assumed that tens of thousands of people were dying. And it just broke my heart to see my country under attack like that. And I didn't know what to do. I mean, we were in orbit, and we were isolated, and we had trouble even communicating with people. But we continued to take pictures and document it. We saw all the contrails disappear out of the sky as the airplanes were landed. And then a month later, I saw the invasion of Afghanistan from space. Some of my classmates and friends were involved in that. What made it even more personal is the day after the attack, one of my friends from the ground called and said, hey, Frank, I got some bad news. And it turned out that the captain of American Airlines Flight 77 that crashed into the Pentagon was a classmate of mine from the Naval Academy. He and I both flew F-4 Phantoms. We were both in the Drum and Bugle Corps. We were both aerospace engineering majors, and we knew each other very well. So it became very personal to me. And I have sons of friends who are still over there fighting, and some of you may end up over there. And I want to tell you that even though the country doesn't do all they should and could for folks that have made tremendous sacrifices, we need to keep that in mind all the time. And those of you who end up going over to serve, remember that there are a lot of us who believe in what you're doing and believe in your ability to fight for freedom. And those who don't need to honor them and make sure that we don't forget why they're doing what they're doing. And we need to keep our country safe so that this never happens again. This is ground zero and what it looks like now. The world is a big place, it's a small place, it's a very special place, but it's our only place. And you can see as you look around the world where it's inhabited, where all the energy is being used, where the problem areas of the world are. But we have to take care of it. The shuttle helped us do that. The shuttle helped us build the station. It helped us look at the world. And it helped us understand better what we've got here and what we have to do in order to keep it safe. It'll be your job to pick up the baton and to make sure you understand, particularly a crowd like this that is so gifted and so intelligent and so willing to work hard. It'll be your job to take over the leadership of solving these problems. I hope we've done a good job of getting that started and moving things in the right direction, but you'll have to make some decisions for yourself. And you'll have to decide how, after all these years of being taken care of by my family and by teachers and being in school, how am I going to start giving back to the rest of the world? How am I going to contribute to making this a better place to live? It's going to be hard, and there's going to be some big challenges. But someday we're going to have to go beyond low Earth orbit. And this is what my company is doing, is building this spacecraft to provide cargo to the space station. And by the way, you'll be able to see us launch at Wallops in a few months from here. You can see it from Washington. I've seen 2 from my front porch. Because someday we need to get people back to here. And I want Americans to pick up that flag and bring it back to the Smithsonian, not some other country. But beyond that, I want people to take pictures like this again of Earthrise behind the moon. I want people to take it, not satellites. And then I want your generation to go here, to go to Mars. The first humans that will inhabit Mars are in school right now. It could be one of you or several of you. And the men and women that make that trip are going to be even more courageous than people who have done what's been done already in space, because it's a long wait to Mars. It's a 3-year trip. Lots of dangers involved. So you got to have big dreams. You got to think about where you want to go and why you want to go there. And the things that will help you get there are these words. Aviate, what are they?
Aviate, navigate, communicate.
Because there's a lot out there to see and do, and who knows what you're going to find. How many of you think there's other beings out there that we might run into? How many of you think that we're the only ones? Usually about half and half. Either way, what we do in the future is very important. Either scenario that we discover is really significant. You ought to think about, what are you going to discover? Where are you going to go? And how are you going to lead us and your children into the future? I've gone a little bit long. I apologize for that. Maybe we have time for a couple of questions. Okay. But thank you very much for your attention. Yes, sir.
I was wondering, you guys said that you had to usually be really clean all the time. How did you guys bathe or shower if there's 0 G?
You ever taken what your parents might call a bird bath? That's what my parents call it, where you just take a wet washcloth and just wash the kid off and use a little soap and clean them off. That's basically what we do. We just wet the washcloths with warm water. We have special soap up there that doesn't stay on your body very long, and you can even wash your hair, but no shower. I mean, they've tried to develop showers, but it's so hard to keep the water in and not get it all over the station. But we think we stay relatively clean. When the shuttle crew arrived, they had a different opinion. But yeah, hygiene is important when you're on a ship or on a deployment like that. Keeps you healthy. Yes.
What are the effects of space like on the body? Like specifically, did it change how you think, your eyesight?
He asked what the effects on the human body are. We're still learning a lot of that, and things are coming out about why my eyes went bad, because of the intracranial pressure in your brain, because all your fluids shift to the top of your body when you get into space, and it's a very odd feeling. Your head feels like a pumpkin. You feel like you're hanging by your knees. You've done that. You only want to do that a while. After about 15 minutes, I said, I've had enough of this. I want to go back upright, but it takes 3 days, really, to get rid of the feeling. So that fluid shift affects things. You do eventually get rid of the extra fluid, but then you're a quart low when you come back in, so you have to replenish that. But we have calcium loss due to not walking around, basically. We've had differences in your immune system from being in space. We're not sure exactly what the connection is there. We've had problems with kidney stones because of the calcium being washed out of your body, and it tends to migrate to your kidneys. So we do things to counter that by both diet and pills. So there's a number of effects, all of which are going to be magnified when you go to Mars. Yes?
Did you have any electrical problems due to solar flares?
We did have solar flares, and they had us stay in the central part of the modules for a couple of hours one time because of that. The most spectacular problem we had was a meteor shower, though, and I didn't have time to include it, but that's pretty amazing to watch from space. Where do you think you look for the meteors? Up, space. What causes a meteor? Friction with the Earth's atmosphere, right? So you have to look down. And when we had a big meteor shower, it was like we were being invaded by space invaders because there were hundreds of them coming in at one time. I remember thinking, I ought to have my helmet on here because we could hear them pinging off. They're just grains of sand, but we could hear them on the outside. Yes?
After the Apollo program, why did NASA not focus so much on the moon anymore?
NASA was still focused on the moon. The administration decided to cancel it. All that NASA does is driven by Congress and our politics. And despite the fact that it's science and NASA puts plans together, final decisions made of amount of funding and what direction they're going to go are made by our government. And so you as taxpayers have a say in that, and you as voters, either now or soon, have a say in that. So make sure you tell your representatives what you think we should be doing in areas like space or research.
Another round of applause.
Thank you.